Welcome to an evening with Dr. Lott Jr., hosted by the Golden Gate United NRA Members Council and the San Francisco Republican Party. My name is Gerard J. Cicottini. I'm president of the council, president of Golden Gate United NRA Members Council. We are the council in San Francisco. What is an NRA Members Council? The California NRA Members Councils is an official NRA program solely in California to fight against the attacks on our Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Those are the 27 words of the Second Amendment in our Bill of Rights that protects our whole Constitution. There are NRA members councils all over California. We are an all-volunteer group of NRA members that are politically active, promoting shooting sports, truth and gun ownership, gun safety, elections, and etc., all under the strict guidelines of the NRA. Our political successes are directly in relation to our active members. The more active members in our councils, the more successes. It's that simple. To join an NRA members council, you must be an NRA member and registered to vote. If you want to get involved, sign up or renew your NRA membership. We will send you our special NRA sign-up link that has all the council discounts and promotions. If you are not already an NRA member, use the NRA sign-up link. All members' council discounts apply from that link. And you can save that link. You can sign people up to the NRA and everything, and they'll get the discounts and that so forth. So you can use that link. And I'll send that to everybody later after the meeting. If you are tired of politicians taking away your freedom of the Second Amendment, virtually disarming you, and you want to do something about it, no matter where you live in California, fill out the Cal NRA online volunteer form. Both links will be emailed to you. After completing the online volunteer form, you will be connected by a members council near you. So they will contact you. All right. We're going through a pretty much fight right now in Sacramento. The man who could tell you about it is the next person here is Ed Worley. I'm going to introduce him. He was the NRA ILA lobbyist in Sacramento for over 20 years and is now the manager of the NRA Members Councils. Ed?
Yeah, hey guys, thank you very much. I'll keep it short and sweet. As always, at the Capitol, things are going crazy and we have bills coming up. Get on our alert list, get connected. It's good to see a lot of faces that I haven't seen in a while from all you guys in the Bay Area and every place else. So it's really great. I look forward to seeing all you guys as soon as I can. And we need to go out shooting sometime and actually exercise the Second Amendment rights. So I'm not going to go anything else. There's a lot of stuff going on. I think we all want to hear from John Lott. So I just want to thank everybody and all the members councils for all the hard work you guys do all the time, everything you're doing. And if you need any questions, go ahead and get me offline. Everybody has my phone number and email address. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Gerard. And thank you guys for all your hard work. And January 7th will be my 30th anniversary with NRA in California. And believe me, without all of you guys and the members councils and all the gun clubs I've been to, the thing people need to remember is NRA members are the most important part of the NRA lobbying effort. Not lobbyists, not somebody at the Capitol. It's all the NRA members who do all the hard work. So thank you for everything you're doing. I'm going to mute the phone now and turn it over back to Gerard, and let's get going with the meeting. So,
thanks, Ed. Now I want to introduce you to Clint Grease, who is the executive director of the San Francisco Republican Party, who has a few short words before I introduce Dr. Lott. Clint?
Oh, thank you so much. My name is Clint Grease. I'm the executive director of the San Francisco Republican Party, the growing San Francisco Republican Party. That's right. Something's shifted, and even in the heart of the beast here in San Francisco, people are looking for an alternative, and it's the San Francisco Republican Party they're turning to. So we have a whole new future ahead of us. This evening's event was really the brainchild of Gerard and Leslie. Leslie is a super volunteer, you could say. She's one of our precinct captains, and we have a precinct operation that brings together grassroots Republicans throughout the city, and lots of different events and lots of different things are coming out of it, like tonight's event. So thank you, Leslie, and thank you very much Gerard. We do have a variety of events online and offline. So if you'd like to learn more and be invited to some exciting events like tonight's events, you can add your email and name an email list to our email list at sfgop.org. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. I feel like I'm with family. Just got my first gun myself. Now I need to learn how to use it, and I'm excited. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, and by the way, we're also known as the council in the belly of the beast, so we're kind of like together with this thing. All right. Is John Lott on board?
Yes, he is.
Okay, very good. I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, John Lott. Dr. John Lott Jr. did the original empirical study on guns versus crime, which resulted in his books, More Guns, Less Crime, a study we use today. The Crime Prevention Research Center, CPRC, was founded by Dr. John Lott. An economist and world-recognized expert on guns and crime, Lott has held research teaching positions at various academic institutions, including the University of Chicago, Yale University, the Wharton School of University of Pennsylvania, Stanford University, Rice University, and was a chief economist at the United States Sentencing Commission during the 1988-99. He is currently a contributor to the Hill News newspaper and columnist for News, Fox News and Town Hall. He holds a PhD in economics from UCLA. Nobel laureate Milton Friedman noted that John Lott, who has few equals as a prospective analyst of controversial public policy issues. Dr. Lott is a prolific author for both academic and popular publications. He has published over 100 articles in peer-reviewed academic journals and written 10 books, including More Guns, Less Crime, The Bias Against Guns, Freedomonomics, and his most recent books are Dumbing Down the Courts, How Politics Keep the Smartest Judges Off the Bench, The War on Guns, and his latest book, The Gun Control Myths, How Politicians, the Media, and Botched Studies Have Twisted the Facts on Gun Control, Learn the Actual Facts that Debunk Them. I just read that book, it's fabulous. Dr. Lott has been one of the most productive and cited economists in the world. During 1969 to 2000, he ranked 26th worldwide in terms of quality adjusted total academic journal output, 4th in terms of total research output, and 86th in terms of citations. Among economics, business, and law professors, his research is currently the 28th most downloaded in the world. He is also a frequent writer of op-eds. And with all that in mind, here is Dr. John R. Lott Jr. Dr. Lott.
Thanks for having me here. Anyway, I appreciate you guys taking the time this evening. I think this is the most important election that we're going to have. This election is pretty much going to determine whether or not people are going to have the right to privately own guns or not. I'll just give you one example. The Supreme Court this year was considering taking up 10 cases. You had 4 Republican justices, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, who wanted to take up the case. But from talking to clerks, it's pretty clear that they were very worried that Roberts would vote the wrong way. And so they didn't bring up any cases. And it's been 10 years really since the court has dealt with any case. People talk about all the judges that Trump's put on the bench, and he's put a lot. He's gotten 200 confirmed. But the problem is, even with all those confirmations, he's just brought the courts back into rough political balance. The Democrats control the circuit courts for 24 states, plus the District of Columbia Circuit, which is considered the second most important court in the country. And the Republicans controlled in 26. The problem for people like you is that the places where the Democrats control the circuit courts are generally the places where Democrats control the state governments. And so they've been passing lots of different types of gun control laws. And the Democrats who control the circuits in those cases pretty much think any gun control law that gets passed meets constitutional muster. And the only way you're going to be able to change that is if you can get one more member on the Supreme Court. You're going to have Trump around for 4 more years to replace either Breyer or Ginsburg or both of them in order to get that 5th vote that's going to be necessary in order to do that. So anyway, that's, I think, part of what's at stake. Plus, you know, obviously, if you're going to have Beto O'Rourke be the gun czar under Biden, who, by the way, ran the gun control push for Obama, you get an idea of what's going to be coming in terms of regulations. And even worse, Biden has called for elimination of the filibuster. I think pretty much all the Democratic senators have called for the elimination of the filibuster. Obama, a week ago, called for the elimination of the filibuster, saying that it was basically Jim Crow era, which is pretty bizarre because the filibuster has been around since the beginning of the country. And if they get rid of the filibuster, then you're just going to need a simple majority in the Senate to pass any bill that they want to pass. And there are going to be a lot of bills that are going to quickly go through the House and the Senate. If you want to have an idea what life is going to be like in the United States afterwards, just look at Virginia this year, where I guess they passed something like 10 different gun control bills that are making it a lot more costly, a lot more difficult for law-abiding citizens to be able to go and get guns for self-defense. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about my book, my new book, Gun Control Myths, which I think is one of the best ones that I've put together. It goes through 36 different myths. I'm just going to talk about a few of them here. You know, one of the ones that we very frequently hear is that the United States is #1 in terms of mass public shootings. And when Obama was president, he would frequently make that claim. And when people in the media would ask him for evidence, they would go and point to a study by a professor at the University of Alabama named Adam Lankford. When Lankford's study came out, I have to confess, I was pretty dubious about it to begin with. He claimed that 31% of all the mass public shooters in the world were in the United States. And so we had by far the highest rate of any country in the world. And I had asked for a copy of his paper. He wouldn't give it to me. I asked for his list of cases. He wouldn't give it to me. Finally, about 6 months after it started getting news coverage, and by the way, it's probably gotten more worldwide news coverage than any other research this century, by far. It took me 6 months before I finally was able to get a copy of his paper, and it took 4.5 years before he finally made his list of cases public. And I think it's pretty clear why it took him so long to make his list of cases public. He was pretty much forced to do so last year after I published a paper in an academic journal, kind of going through the numbers and explaining why it was impossible for him to get the type of result that he had. It turned out, for example, that outside the United States, he had only included cases where one mass shooter was involved. And he had even missed a lot of cases where one mass shooter was involved. But any case, let's say where 2 or 3 mass public shooters were involved, except for one in Russia, which who knows why he included just that one case, were excluded from his sample. So what you found is that he literally missed thousands of mass public shootings outside the United States, and he overcounted the cases in the United States. And when you use the definition that he claims that he used, the United States makes about 1% of the world's mass public shooters, which is way less than our share of the world population, where we make up almost 5% of the world population. So we're way below the average. And we're below a lot of countries in Europe. I mean, you have major countries in Europe, for example, like France, that has a fatality rate from mass public shooting that's about 111% higher than the rate in the United States. Russia, it's about 50% higher. But there are other countries in Europe, from Finland and Norway and Switzerland, just major countries, I'm not even going to go through smaller countries like Serbia and what have you, that have fatality rates from mass public shootings that are at least 25% higher than the rate that we have in the United States. The thing is, we just don't hear about most of these cases. I mean, everybody heard about the mass public shooting in New Zealand last year, but relatively few people would know that within 24 hours of that attack, there was a big school shooting in Brazil, or there was a mass public shooting in the Netherlands. The vast majority of these cases that occur outside the United States often don't get any news coverage in the United States. And when they do get news coverage, it's usually buried at the back of the paper. And I can understand that. Cases in the United States are a lot more newsworthy for the American news media and for people in the country than cases, let's say, in Brazil or in France or in other countries in Europe. We may hear about the concert hall shooting in 2015, November 2015, where 130 people were killed in a concert in Paris. Or we may hear about the 385 people killed in a school shooting in Russia in 2005. But it's very little coverage, even in most of those cases, and Americans quickly forget about those cases. You know, few people would know that 3 of the 6 worst K through 12 school shootings have, since 2000, have been in Germany because they just don't get much coverage. Now, there are lots of points to make here. One is that a lot of these attacks, these countries that have much higher rates than we have here in the United States, have extremely strict gun control. France, for example, has a ban essentially on semi-automatic guns. France or Germany, it can take a year or more to go through the process to get a license to be able to go and own a gun. You know, in a country like Russia, you're talking about 1% or so of the population is legally able of adults are legally able to own a gun. You know, Brazil, which has a murder rate that's 6 times higher than the murder rate that we have in the United States, has only about 0.2% of the adult population legally licensed to go and own a gun. You know, so you look across countries, and the ones with the higher gun ownership rates actually tend to have relatively lower rates of mass public shootings. But there are lots of other issues here. I'll give you a couple. One is the successful mass public shootings in the United States, 94% of those occur in what I would call gun-free zones, places where civilians are banned from having guns. Now, you know, Michael Bloomberg's groups will go and say, well, those aren't gun-free zones because police are still allowed to go and carry guns in those areas. What I would go and argue is that there's a big difference between a uniformed police officer trying to stop one of these mass public shootings and a concealed carry permit holder. Police have an extremely difficult job in stopping those types of attacks. If you have one person who's armed and he's in uniform, these attackers have huge strategic advantages. They believe that if they can kill that one officer, they'll have free reign to go after other people that are there. So if they're going to attack, the one person that they're going to target first and kill is going to be the officer. Plus, they have other strategic options. They can wait for the officer to leave the area before they attack, or they can move on to some other type of target. It makes the job that police have extremely difficult in stopping these types of attacks. The thing is, the ones that are successful, at least, in doing these attacks may be crazy, but they're not stupid. Their goal is to try to kill as many people as possible. And they pick those targets where they're going to be relatively more successful. Their goal is to get media attention. And they know that the more people they kill, the more media attention that they're going to be able to go and get. The other point that I would make is that there are a lot of intended mass public shootings which are stopped, which are not successful. And what you find time after time is they're stopped by concealed handgun permit holders. On our website at crimeresearch.org, we've collected literally dozens of cases in the last few years where people with permit concealed handguns have stopped these attacks. One of the chapters in gun control myths, goes through and lists out those cases. And one of the things that I point out there is if you look over the last 5 years, you're literally only going to find a couple of those cases that I go through in that chapter, which get national news coverage. And when they have given national news coverage, they've completely botched the story. So for example, in one of the two cases, people heard about the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. Just 3 days after that, there was an attack at a Kroger grocery store in Louisville, Kentucky. The attacker had gone into the grocery store, had targeted blacks, was shooting blacks. And what got the attention of the national media was the quote from the attacker where he said to a white customer, "Whites don't shoot whites." And the way it was interpreted on Meet the Press or other places was this murderer was assuring this white customer that since they were both white, he had nothing to worry about and he wasn't going to shoot him. Well, the problem is they left out the first part of the quote. The first part of the quote that got local media attention, even if not really much national news attention, was the full quote from the killer was, "Please don't shoot me. Whites don't shoot whites." So rather than assuring the customer that the white customer wasn't going to get shot, the white customer had a permanent concealed handgun and he was pointing the gun at the murderer. And the murderer was begging the customer not to shoot the murderer. In fact, they did exchange gunfire. The murderer was seriously wounded, got in his car, was able to drive about a mile down the road before he passed out, and that's when the police were able to apprehend him. But at the time, I was able to kind of Twitter. I was linked up with Chuck Todd, and we were able to communicate back and forth with social messaging. And I wrote Chuck and I said, I just watched your program. I think you missed the first part of the quote. Here's some local media from Louisville that goes through it more in detail. And hopefully you'll correct it next week. He never corrected it and he blocked me after that point. And, but I guess the bottom line before I stop talking about these mass public shootings is my own guess is the entire gun control debate that we have in the United States would be dramatically different if two things happen. One, if once in a while, when these mass public shootings, the successful ones occur in these gun-free zones, the media would mention that we've had yet another mass public shooting in a place where guns are banned. They don't even have to do it all the time, just once in a while. And the thing is, often the media covers things like how the person got the gun, or they thought the person got the gun, or what gun was used, things that are hard for them to determine quickly, and very frequently they get wrong. The easiest thing for them to actually check would be whether or not the attack occurred in a gun-free zone. It's pretty easy to go and look that up. They have news people at the scene, even in the jurisdictions where the private property owners can decide. A pair of binoculars would pretty quickly tell them whether there's a sign at the front of the establishment which bans people being able to go and carry in those places. And, so that's one thing that I think would make a huge difference in the debate. The second thing that I think would make a huge difference if once in a while the media would give national news coverage to cases where concealed handgun permit holders have stopped what otherwise would have been a mass public shooting. And there are lots of cases I could give you where it's almost hard to understand why the media hasn't given these national news coverage. I can give you a couple cases. Everybody remembers the Pulse nightclub shooting. It's the second worst mass public shooting that we've had. Just a week after that, there was another attack at a nightclub, this time in South Carolina, but it ended very differently. The attacker there had shot 3 people. Was shooting at a 4th. When the 4th person he was shooting at had a permanent concealed handgun and shot the attacker, seriously wounding him. Now, there's one difference between Florida and South Carolina. Florida is one of 10 states that ban permanent concealed handguns in nightclubs and places that get more than 50% of their revenue from serving alcohol. South Carolina isn't. South Carolina allows people to carry permanent concealed handguns in those places. Well, fortunately, in South Carolina, there was a person who was obeying the law and was there and was able to stop it. But you would think, given the huge coverage that was continuing for the nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida, the Pulse nightclub shooting, there would be some sensitivity for the media to make a comparison. And yet you will search in vain to find any national news coverage of, except for an op-ed or so that I wrote, on the South Carolina case. I'll give you another example. You have the Parkland shooting. Just a few months after that, not very far away in Florida, there was an attack at an elementary school gathering. A man had come up, started firing. You had literally hundreds of students there as well as their parents. He had gotten off a few shots when a vendor who was there, who happened to have a permanent concealed handgun, was able to stop the attacker. Again, you would think, given all the huge, massive attention for the Parkland shooting, there would be, and this is nearby in Florida, another attack involving a school assembly there. You would think that there would be some interest in covering it. But again, you're going to find it very difficult. I mean, I wrote about it nationally, but besides myself, you're going to find it, you're just not going to find national news coverage of it. And I could give you multiple other examples like that, and I do so in my book, Gun Control Myths. There are other things that we could talk about here. One thing that's often been brought up in the media over the years, maybe not so much the last 4 or 5 months, but earlier, has been the claim that gun ownership has fallen. I can give you lots of headlines in the New York Times and USA Today and the Washington Post and other places claiming that gun ownership has fallen dramatically over time. There's one key feature that almost all these news stories have, and that is they use what's called the General Social Survey by NORC, National Opinion Research Council. And you know, once in a while you'll see a survey by CBS or somebody else used, but that's only when it falls. When those surveys go back up, because they tend to bounce around over time, you won't get national news stories about that. The thing is, if you look over time, whether it's surveys by Quinnipiac, CNN, Pew, CBS, YouGov, Wall Street Journal, NBC, Washington Post, ABC, Monmouth, Gallup, they're fairly flat over the long run. Again, you may see somewhat ups and downs. I'll give you one story about, I guess about 7 years ago now. ABC News was doing a big series on the dangers of guns in the home. And I got a call from one of the producers, and she talked to me for like an hour and a half. And I was trying to convince her, not very successfully, that she was greatly exaggerating the risks and dangers of guns in the home. And anyway, towards the end of the conversation, she was getting frustrated with me. And she said, well, at least this won't be a problem or an issue much longer. And I said, why do you say that? She said, well, gun ownership is disappearing in the homes. And I said, well, what are you relying on, the General Social Survey? And she goes, yeah. I said, I don't know if you know this, but your news organization, ABC News, has its own survey. And your survey is actually very flat over time, basically bouncing around between 44 and 46 or 48%. And she didn't believe me of households owning guns. So I said, well, I can send you a link to it. And so I sent her a link and she thanked me. Anyway, a few days after that, they ran their series. It was a huge series. It was on Wednesday, it was on Good Morning America, the Evening News, Nightline. On Thursday, the same 3 broadcasts. On Friday, the same 3 broadcasts, plus on 2020 on Friday night. So it got huge, massive coverage. Anyway, they kept on mentioning during the segments that gun ownership was falling in the United States, and they never mentioned their own survey that was there. They relied on the General Social Survey, which at the time had shown gun ownership rate had fallen to about 32% in households in the United States. The reason why I think they do that is I think they want to make gun owners feel isolated, that somehow you're on the tide of history is against you, that other people are not wanting to own guns. And I talked to Tom Smith when I was at University of Chicago. He's around there, and we had lunch one time. This was back in the 90s. This was before I did my research. And I have to confess, I didn't really have very strong views on this issue at the time. He made the comment to me that he was glad that his survey was showing that gun ownership rates, there was a large drop in it, because he told me it would, quote, make it easier for politicians to do the right things on guns, and end quote, and pass different gun control laws. I have to say that even these other surveys, which are bouncing around between 40 and 48% or so, really are underestimating the gun ownership rate in the country. One thing is you can have up to, let's say, 9% of people in these surveys refuse to give an answer. And even if you assume that 40% of those people actually own guns but aren't willing to do it, my guess it's higher than that. That's still another 4 percentage points that you would add on to these surveys. But there's more than that too. I'll give you one other example. I could just talk about this, but I'll just give you one other example. And what you find is that married women are about 15 percentage points less likely to say that a gun is owned in the household than married men are. Now, there are multiple possibilities that are there. It could be that a guy owns a gun, but he hasn't told his wife that he owns a gun. I suppose that's possible. There are other possibilities that are there, but one thing that I think is possible is that married women might be just more, because you think it should be the same. Married women might be just more reticent to go and tell a stranger whether they own a gun in the home than married men are. The other thing is these surveys are usually done after big mass public shootings. And so there's reason to believe that because of social pressure and other things, people may not want to tell strangers who are calling up that they own guns in the home. And I could go on, but I'll just give you one other example. If you look at Illinois, whether you have to have a FOID card in order to own a gun. Since 1999, the number of people having FOID cards, or 2005, I'm sorry, in Illinois has gone from 1.2 million to 2.3 million. That's over a million increase. At the same time, the General Social Survey for Illinois has shown a drop in gun ownership of about 300,000 people. So, it gives you at least some caution that the survey may not be very useful. And at the same time, we've had a huge increase, not in California, but across the rest of the country in terms of concealed handgun permits. In 1999, there were about 2.7 million concealed carry permit holders in the United States. Last year, there were about 19 million. And it's gone up, my guess is over 20 million now, but I'm just putting the numbers together on. So that's just another issue there. I could go through another thing that's in the book. The claim is that easy access to guns make it more likely that people will use guns to kill themselves in a suicide. And, that's simply false. I mean, one simple example is just look at any of the places that have banned guns, whether it be Washington, D.C. or Chicago or other places around the world. And you just don't see changes in suicide rates when guns are banned. There are lots of very easy ways for people to go and commit suicide. Some of them are much less painful than using a gun. The thing is, as I go through in gun control myths, if you're talking about the New York Times, or you're talking about other media outlets, they'll go and use, they'll pick a couple comparisons which have low success rates for people killing themselves, and they'll cherry pick and ignore the ones that have high rates. So for example, cyanide has an almost perfect way of killing oneself if you want to do it. Stepping in front of a train or a bus or a truck. falling from a height is a very effective way to kill yourself. Hanging oneself has a very high success rate, quote unquote success rate. So, it's just by who they pick to make comparisons with that they can make this claim that guns are unusually successful in killing people. I'm just going to finish going through one other example from my book, Gun Control Myths, and that is the claim that we need background checks to go and stop mass public shootings. It's after each of the mass public shootings during the Obama presidency, it's the one thing that he kept on pushing all the time, usually the only gun control law. It's often the only gun control law that gun control advocates will push. And yet there's not one mass public shooting, at least in this century, that would have been stopped if such a national background check on private transfers of guns had been in effect. It'd be nice if they had some magic bullet that could do it, but if it can't even stop a single one of these attacks, I wish more of the media would go and ask gun control advocates to provide an example. If you think this is a useful solution, give me an example where an attack would have been stopped if people had had that type of law in place. My own belief is that the reason why they push these background check rules is they just want to make it costly for people to be able to go and get guns. We frequently hear that there are 2.5 million dangerous prohibited people that have been stopped from obtaining guns because of background checks. That's simply false. What they should say is that there have been 2.5 million initial denials, and that virtually all of those are mistakes. It's one thing to stop somebody who's a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because they have a name similar to a felon from being able to go and buy a gun. When you buy a gun, you fill out what's called the 4473. You put down your name, your social security number, your address, your birthday, your race, your eye color. You think they're using all that information. In the vast majority of cases, they're simply using roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays. And that creates a lot of mistakes. And it's primarily minorities which are prevented from buying guns. People who have names similar to each other in their racial groups. So for example, Hispanics tend to have names similar to other Hispanics. Blacks tend to have names similar to other Blacks. 33% of Black males in the United States are legally prohibited from owning a gun because of past felony history. Whose names are their names most likely to be confused with? Other law-abiding good Black males who want to go and buy a gun to protect themselves and their families. If you own a company or somebody who does, and they go and do criminal background checks or background checks on employees, and you're going to suggest to them that they should go and use roughly phonetically similar names to their employees to go and do background checks, they're going to look at you like you're from Mars. They're just not going to think that you're being serious about that because they know that there's going to be lots of mistakes if they go and do that. Here's the deal. For 20 years, I've been suggesting to gun control advocates that they probably could get universal background checks passed nationally if they made a few changes. A couple of the changes would be, one, simply require that the federal government has to do background checks in the same way that the federal government basically mandates that private companies do background checks on employees. But if you bring that up to Democrats, they will say it's a poison pill and they will fight against you. When the Fix NICS bill was brought up, I made that suggestion to numerous people in the Senate. And I was told when they brought it up with Democrats, the Democrats wouldn't even talk about it, that they said it was a poison pill. The other thing to fix is the cost of doing the background checks. Now in California, the cost of doing a background check on a private transfer is by law, I understand, $20. They essentially have a price control on it. The cost is higher than that. You look around the country, in Oregon, it's like $55, and Washington, D.C., it costs $125. In New York City, you'll find, $200 is not uncommon to go and do a background check on a private transfer. It's not like a sales tax that gets added to the cost of a gun when you buy a new gun. You only see it when you're involved in a private transfer, and the only thing that's being provided there is the background check. In California, if a licensed dealer refuses to go and do these background checks, they're going to risk losing their license that's there. By the way, the background checks that you have on ammunition that started July a year ago, between July and January, there were like 110,000 law-abiding citizens that were improperly stopped from being able to go and buy ammunition because of the background checks that were there. The thing is, this is a real cost. Whether it's $55 or $100 in California, it's just a way of making dealers lose money by making them charge less than their cost of providing the service. It's just a way of taxing them and trying to drive them out of business, making them bear a loss that's there. Nationally, when you have this, 55 or 125 or whatever may not stop you or I from being able to buy a gun. But my research convinces me that the people who benefit the most from owning guns are poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas. The very people who are most likely victims of violent crime benefit the most from having the option to be able to go and protect themselves and their families. And $125 or $100 or $75 may make the difference between whether or not they're legally able to go and purchase a gun to defend themselves and their families. Here's the problem. It'd be easy to fix. If gun control advocates really believe that background checks lower crime, and I don't, but if they really believe that that's the case, then why not pay for it out of general revenue? And here's an argument. If you want to encourage people to go and do the background checks, do you really want to make them have to pay a tax for doing it? I mean, here you have law-abiding citizens that are going out of their way to go and do what the gun control advocates say they want them to do. So if I charge you $100 for doing what I want you to do I think you'll be more likely to do it or less likely to do it? That's a non-trivial fee there. So if they really want to encourage people to do it, they should pay for it out of general revenue and not make them have to pay the burden for doing it. The other thing is, the benefit presumably is for everybody, not just the guy who's buying the gun. And so why make the guy who's buying the gun have to bear the entire burden of this fee when other people are supposedly benefiting from this? It makes no sense in any type of economic reasoning to make, for either of those reasons, to have the entire fee borne by the person who's buying the gun. Anyway, I could go on. I don't know how long.
Well, we have a lot of questions.
Sure.
We can move on to Q&A.
Sure. So anyway, I appreciate you letting me talk about my book. I hope that's people have found it useful. You can get it on Barnes & Noble, the website, or Amazon. And you can go to our website at Crime Research. I guess there's like 50 people here or something like that. I hope you guys will sign up for our newsletter email that we send out once every 2 weeks. I hope a couple people on the list are on here are already subscribing, but it gives you these types of resources and studies and stuff that I've been talking about.
Okay, we have a number of questions that have been submitted through the registration. Why don't we start with those? The first one is, please comment on the current violence in many cities versus the defund police movement.
Right. Well, you start with a pretty easy question to begin with. Look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. If you make it so that criminals don't have to worry about being arrested, don't have to worry about being punished, you're going to have more crime. Take a city like Chicago. I mean, just in general, not just because during these riots. In 2018, only 13% of murders resulted in arrest. That's on average. Gangs are presumably even lower, though it hasn't been broken out. And you don't even have everybody convicted of those who are arrested. So you're probably talking about single-digit numbers of murderers who belong to gangs in Chicago who end up being convicted. Well, you know, big surprise. If you have less than 10% of murderers end up being convicted, they're going to do a lot more murders. And, you know, if you want to see what the world will be like with defunding the police, just see what happened to places when they ordered the police to stand down. You know, so we see all across the country. In San Francisco, the county jail there released about 50% of the inmates who were there. Los Angeles is similar. There are other places across the country where you can find a third or also a half of inmates being released because of concerns about the coronavirus that's there. You know, it's kind of been a perfect storm in terms of making it less risky for criminals to go and commit crime and releasing criminals who had already been in jail. The bizarre irony is that the same politicians who want to release criminals and don't want to arrest them, these are the same politicians which are arguing that people shouldn't be able to go and own guns. You know, you have a situation in St. Louis, for example, where the police had only been arresting the most egregious rioters. The district attorney there has refused to bring charges against a single one of the rioters that were there. And yet when you have rioters go and break down the gate to a private community, go on a private road, actually go on somebody's private yard and make threats, when that couple goes and brandishes guns, even the same district attorney that refused to bring charges against any of the other, against any of the rioters, brought felony charges against that couple that's there. Now, I know the governor has promised to pardon them if they're found guilty, but that's a ways into the process. They're going to have very costly legal bills. A good portion of their life is going to be taken up just dealing with the issues of the trial that's there. And, you know, I'm glad that eventually they would be pardoned, but they're going to have some real costs between now and then, and costs that they'll never get back. And so, you know, the thing is, I know Chris Wallace doesn't seem to be too well informed on this. But when he was talking to Trump, I have to also say that Trump's staff didn't serve him well in that interview. But Chris Wallace challenged Trump about whether Biden had advocated defunding the police. There's an interview that we have up on our website that Biden gave on July 8th, where I guess a journalist was asking him questions about defunding the police. And was giving him examples, saying that we should replace police officers with social workers. And he said, just take the case in Atlanta where there was this shooting of this Brooks guy who was inebriated and had passed out in his car in a drive-through lane for a Wendy's restaurant. The police had shown up. They had tried to be nice to him, extremely courteous. He was obviously drunk. But this guy was much larger than either of the police officers. He was easily a head taller than either of the police officers, probably weighed at least 70 pounds more than either of the police officers. And he attacked them and was able to get the stun gun from one of them, fired the gun once, was aiming at the second officer, was going to fire again when he was fatally shot by one of the officers. As far as I can tell, the officers behaved textbook. But the officer was fired, who fatally shot Brooks. He's facing felony murder charges, faces the death penalty if he's convicted. I don't think he'll be convicted. But in any case, you have a situation where you demoralize police across the country. I mean, here they say, look, the guy did exactly what he was told to do. And yet he's facing felony murder charges. And so not only do you have these issues of ordering police to stand down, releasing criminals, cutting police budgets, but even the police that are there are, demoralized and they don't know what to do on these situations. And this is one issue I could talk about for a week, but I just mentioned one last example here. In Minneapolis, where the city council voted unanimously to defund the police, whatever that means. I mean, I assume it's something where they're going to have it so that they have social workers instead of police if they can. You have the city council has voted to provide armed private security for the city council members who want it. They've been spending $7,000 per week per city council member who wants the private armed security. So apparently they understand, it's not Bloomberg that understands the benefits of having private armed security. You have these individuals that, unfortunately, they're not offering vouchers for people who live in the high crime parts of Minneapolis or who have faced the riots, for them to go and hire private armed security for themselves. But the city council members believe that they're important enough to get it.
Thank you. Second question. What do you foresee in the coming year or 2 years regarding gun control measures in California?
Well, I'm not even sure it matters what's going to happen in California. What's going to matter is what's going to happen nationally. And if Biden wins, he's going to pull the Senate with him. Right now, if you just kind of look at the betting odds, it looks like it's a 50-50 breakdown in the Senate. And whoever wins the presidency, their vice president will break the ties. And Biden has already promised to support getting rid of the filibuster. Obama last week promised, supported getting rid of it. As far as I know, all the senators in the Senate, the Democrat side, support getting rid of the filibuster. And so you're going to be in a situation where you're going to get all sorts of crazy stuff passed really quickly. And more importantly, is going to be what happens to the courts. As I mentioned earlier, I think that Trump has just brought this into rough balance. And 4 years from now, it'll be completely out of whack again. And the thing is, you have 4 Democratic nominees on the Supreme Court who don't believe that there's an individual right to self-defense and would be very happy if they get a chance to overturn Heller and McDonald. And they're not going to stop any of the circuit courts that are controlled by Democrats from, approving any gun control law that goes through. I mean, California has all sorts of nutty things already on the books. I mean, you have these safety checks for guns where you've grandfathered in old handguns, dropping from a certain height onto concrete without damaging the gun. If you change the grip or you change the color of the gun or you make any change, it's no longer grandfathered in. And the number of guns that are allowed to be sold, handguns, has dropped dramatically. You have other things like the ballistic fingerprint or the micro stamping. Nobody's figured out how that's supposed to work. It's a pretty stupid thing anyway. Even if somebody can figure out how to microstamp, your casing there, just a simple file on the end would change it, or they could change the firing pin. It's just easily, something with big costs and easy to get around. But nobody's figured that out, and that's going to make it, these different rules are going to eventually make it so you're not going to have any handguns legally sold in California. And when that happens, you get near that, there are going to be court cases, and that's going to depend upon, who controls the Ninth Circuit. And right now, the Democrats still control the Ninth Circuit, and they're going to control it through the end of Trump's first term. You're going to have one more term for Trump to have a chance to change it.
Thank you. Third question. What do you see as the biggest threat to our gun rights besides the Democratic Party?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure who else is going to be passing this stuff, but it just, look, this election, whatever side you're on the gun issue, this election, I believe, is going to determine whether or not people are going to be able to privately own guns. And that's going to involve a lot of what's going to be happening with the courts. If Trump wins, I think he'll appoint somebody else like Kavanaugh or Gorsuch, probably even better than either of those two, hopefully. But at least as good as them, and I think they're good on this issue. In fact, he wanted to appoint Amy Barrett from the Seventh Circuit in place of Kavanaugh. But the problem that he faced was that the Republicans at the time only had a 50 to 49 seat majority in the Senate. They should have had 51-49, but McCain refused to resign from his seat that was there so that somebody else could be appointed. And so Trump couldn't even lose one vote. And if he had appointed Amy Barrett, who I think would have been extremely strong on the Second Amendment issue, and it's my understanding she was his first choice, if he had appointed her, then he would have lost both Collins and Murkowski because of the abortion issue. And so he couldn't have gotten her through the Senate. So, if you ask me what the biggest threat is, if you're somebody who supports people being able to own guns for self-defense, I think this election is. But I mean, there are lots of threats in this election. I mean, things like all these mail-in ballots that are going to be used in states around the country, vote harvesting like you have in California, and now you're going to be having in Nevada. It just makes the whole thing a complete joke in terms of having any type of confidence. And I agree with President Trump. It makes it very hard to have much confidence in the outcome of the votes.
Thank you. Next question. What can we do to get our full 2A amendment rights back? Like, what can we do today?
Right. Well, it sounds like all these questions are pretty similar, except for maybe the first one. Look, I don't think it's going to matter very much how you vote in California here. I think what's going to matter is what's going to happen in the rest of the country. So if you guys can support what's happening in the rest of the country, I think that would be useful. I mean, hopefully California will pick up a few of the 7 congressional seats that they lost in the last election, where you had vote harvesting. I mean, I suppose if the Democrats are going to use vote harvesting, Republicans might as well do the same stuff. I hate to advise people to go and do that type of thing. But, you have a lot of fraud. I mean, I just was reading this past week that Los Angeles County had gotten, I guess it was like 6 or something like that, felony convictions for people who had gone through Skid Row offering cigarettes and alcohol to get people to register to vote and vote in vote harvesting schemes. They should have gotten a lot more people convicted for that, but at least, because it's hard to get people. When you have vote buying that occurs, both parties to the transaction want to hide it. Both the buyer and the seller don't want to admit that they committed a crime. And so it's very hard to catch those types of cases unless you have like a movie camera or something going on to take video of the thing that's happening. We just finished a report that you can find on our website at crimeresearch.org where we looked at voting rules in other countries. And the vast majority of the world bans mail-in voting for people living in their country. And even the countries that do allow mail-in voting for people living in their country usually require that you have to have a photo ID to go and pick up the ballot. But, and the reason why they ban it is because these countries have learned the hard way that you can have all sorts of fraud with mail-in ballots. So, you know, the thing is, if the media wants to keep on calling Trump delusional for being concerned about this, then the vast majority of the world is delusional.
Thank you. Last submitted question. Is there a consolidated or coordinated website of frequently asked questions that lists all the most used arguments for gun control and the valid, concise, quotable rebuttals that citizens can use to respond and support letters to legislatures and media?
Well, that's one reason why I wrote the book, Gun Control Myths. Chapter 2 in the book basically takes, you know, it's like you have the New York Times and Fox and the BBC would go and makes, you know, they'd list out claims for gun control. And I basically went through those and just provided an answer to each of the claims that they made there. And so, you know, you can, suicide and guns, you can look it up, background checks and mass public shootings, it's there. You know, what do academics think about gun control? You know, the things about mass public shootings. I go through all those things in the book there. So that's what I try to do. I mean, in our website, there's a search bar, you can go and check. We have things on the left-hand side that you can go down for different topics. But, you know, that's basically the reason why I wrote the book, though, to try to go through. I basically took lists of common gun control claims that you see in the media these days and trying to respond to it.
Do you have any final closing comments?
I don't know, I think we pretty much covered most of the stuff, but appreciate you having me here. You know, I hope you guys look at our website and stuff, and I hope you found the stuff I talked about useful.